Welcome to the Fave 5 podcast. This is episode number 7. In each week, we have a different guest where we talk about their life story and talk about 5 categories of books, food, music, sports, and humor. And my guest today is Scott Adzick, a high school classmate of mine from Clayton High School in Clayton, Missouri. I first met Scott in 1970 when I had moved to Clayton from New Jersey. And I had been the basketball statistician at the previous school. And I thought when I got to Clayton and it was senior year, there would certainly already be somebody that did that and I would be out of a job. But on the first day of basketball practice, I showed up and talked to the coach, Dawson Pikey, asked him if he needed a statistician. And he said, yes, you can do it. So that was great. I just like that. I was on the basketball team as the statistician, and the star of the basketball team was Scott Adzick. So that's probably when I met you, Scott, was start of the basketball season. Does that sound about right?
That sounds right about right. You came straight from Tenafly, New Jersey, as I recall. And as far as baseball or excuse me, basketball statistics go or sports statistics go, you were Billy Bean and data analytics before Billy Bean.
That's right. Before there were all the ratings that exist today, I had invented one that we used, and I was just a little ahead of my time, Scott. If I had been a little later, I probably could have capitalized on that. But nonetheless, I invented a system which we called OPERA, the overall player efficiency rating average. And sure, you were the leader of that stat on the Clayton Greyhounds.
Thank you.
And then later in the year, when it got to be baseball season, then I was the scorekeeper of baseball, and once again, you were the star of the baseball team. So we got to know each other through sports, but then we hung out a lot outside of sports and friends throughout that school year and in the following summer. So I'm going to ask you some questions about your background, starting with when and where were you born?
I was born 1953, May 14th, in Omaha, Nebraska. And my father was a professional baseball player. And so they had settled there because he was playing for the Omaha Cardinals. And so I was born in Omaha.
And how long did you live in Omaha?
Well, he was, I think, for a year or two, he was also going to college at the University of Omaha, which became part of the University of Nebraska. And he hurt his throwing shoulder. So that was sort of the end of his baseball career. So then we moved to back to St. Louis. Both my parents were from St. Louis, born and bred in St. Louis.
So what year would you have moved back to St. Louis?
Probably 1955.
Okay. So you were there in Omaha before I got there. I lived in Omaha from 57 to 63.
Really?
I actually got to go to Omaha Cardinals games.
Wow.
And there was a minor league pitcher there you may have heard of named Bob Gibson,
Oh,
who
yeah.
was a local native of Omaha, had gone to Creighton and then was playing for the hometown Cardinals before the Cardinals called him up. And so I got to see him
Exactly.
as a minor leaguer.
Well, there's an interesting story about that, and I don't mean to get sidetracked, but after my father hurt his shoulder, he went back to school, and during the summertime, he would play in the Basin League, which was a semi-pro league, and that allowed college players as long as they weren't paid. And he was both a player and a manager because he would get paid more. So he would card us during the summertime uh, to various places in Nebraska, Herman, Nebraska, and someplace in the South Dakota, Yankton, South Dakota, and Pierre, Nebraska. And so that was a time during the summertime when he could make some extra money. And he actually faced Bob Gibson, who was a Creighton player, great pitcher, of course, Hall of Famer. And when I asked my dad about that, he said, I hit him pretty good. And there's an interesting story though. When he finished at Creighton, he played basketball as well. And actually, during the winter after he graduated, he played for the Harlem Globetrotters.
That's right.
So, and he also the Cardinal scout, who I forget his last name, but his nickname was Mud. He calls up my dad, Nick Adzick, and he says, "We're thinking of giving Bob Gibson a $5,000 signing bonus, which was a lot of money. This must have been 56, 57. And do you think he's worth it? That's a lot of money. And my dad says, well, he throws hard, good live arm, a little wild, great athlete. He says he's got a two for nickel curveball, but if somebody could teach him a slider, he might be pretty good. So
The
the
rest is
reason,
history. So after Omaha, you moved to St. Louis. Where else have you lived?
really many places. In St. Louis, we lived in Hazelwood, 2 Robin Wing Lane. And then we moved to Clayton, and I'll get to that at some point when I was in 5th grade. And then, so we were in Clayton until senior year in high school and graduation. Then moved to Cambridge and Boston, where I went to college, medical school, Master's General Surgery residency in Boston, which is at Harvard Teaching Hospital, Boston Children's. Actually, there's sort of a joke that 17 years in the Harvard system is known pejoratively as Preparation H. And then I did a 2-year research fellowship out in San Francisco at University of California, San Francisco, which is where the fetal surgery stuff started. And then joined the faculty there. So I finished training at age 35 in Boston and went back to UCSF and was on the faculty there. And that's where we really developed clinical fetal surgery. I was there for 7 years with my wife and young son. And then moved to Philadelphia, where I've been since 1995. And I was there. I was recruited to be the surgeon in chief and the Everett Koop Professor of Pediatric Surgery at Penn. And I've been there ever since. It's been going on 31 years next June.
So who was in your family when you were growing up?
Well, father was Nick Adzick, mother Maxine Adzick, 2 younger brothers, Lance, who actually died from a sort of a cardiovascular event a couple years ago. Youngest brother Brett. There were many aunts and uncles and cousins on both sides. Many family get-togethers. And it was interesting because my mother, I think her family originally was Scotch Irish, came to America in the early 1700s, were farmers and worked their way from South Carolina eventually to Missouri. Whereas my father, his parents were immigrants. They came from Montenegro, which you might know as part of Yugoslavia at some point. And that Montenegro was an interesting place because from the mid 1300s until almost to World War II, Montenegro fought the Ottoman Empire Turks. And so they fought for the mountains, and they were Christian. And if you look at a map from 1350 or so until close to World War I, if you look at the Ottoman Empire, swept across North America, up through Constantinople, and through much of Eastern Europe, which is why there's so many mosques within Eastern Europe. But there's one little dot of a different color, and that was Montenegro. And so that was that side. So quite a contrast. Blue-eyed, strawberry blonde mother, father who was darker. There's actually an interesting Alfred Lord Tennyson poem about Montenegro because they really had to be out of necessity a warrior race, and actually probably from survival of the fittest, they were a tall people and subsequently were key players on the Yugoslavian basketball team. And so Alfred Lord Tennyson, during the height of the battle, the Montenegrins and the Ottoman Turks, he wrote a poem which I'd love to recite to you.
Go ahead.
So it's called Montenegro. It's 1877, Alfred Lord Tennyson. And I'll have to translate it a little bit. They rose to where their sovereign eagle sails. So it was the symbol of Montenegro was the double-headed eagle, just like it is for Russia now, actually. They kept their faith, Christian faith, their freedom on the height, chaste, frugal, savage, armed by day and night against the Turk, whose inroad nowhere scales their headlong passes, but his footstep fails, and red with blood, the crescent, the sickle shape for Turkey, reels from fight before their dauntless hundreds in prone flight by thousands down the crags and through the vales. O smallest among peoples, rough rock throne of freedom, warriors beating back the swarm of Turkish Islam for 500 years. That's 25 generations. Great Senegora, which means Black Mountain, Montenegro. Never since thy known black ridges drew the cloud and break the storm, has breathed a race of mightier mountaineers. So I think anybody in Montenegro who was smart got the hell out of there around 1905
Mhm.
and immigrated for greater opportunity. And my paternal grandparents settled in St. Louis because there was a large Serbian community, and there was a church there, and that's the place where they landed. So they set up a homestead in St. Louis. I think my paternal grandfather worked on streetcar lines, strong guy, and then owned a grocery store, and then owned a saloon during Prohibition, for which the liquor constable, whatever, was also Montenegrin, so he got away with a lot of stuff for selling whiskey and booze during Prohibition during the 1920s.
So you had a
So
lot
that's
of extended family members around St. Louis?
yeah. So there, my father was the seventh of seven, three boys, four girls. My mother was the fourth of four girls, and so yes, there were lots of aunts and uncles and lots of cousins and many, many, many family parties. And really, the stress was particularly on the Adzick side was on education and how are you doing in school, and very, very important. My father's two older brothers during before World War II. Uncle John enlisted in the Army, 1941, before Pearl Harbor, and served in Southeast Asia in Guadalcanal. Survived. My Uncle Mike was a Marine. He served and did many, many beach landings against the Japanese, lost many of his buddies, and actually came back and at age 32 died of pancreatic cancer. And then my father, at age 17, wanted to enlist. He was a senior at University City High School. And my, immigrant grandmother didn't want him to go. She already had two sons in the war theater. And he was a spectacular athlete. He was all city halfback, basketball player, and astoundingly good baseball player. And he had scholarship offers to Arkansas and Missouri as a running back, but he wanted to graduate early in March of the senior year. And she finally agreed after saying, no, you can't join the Army. No, you can't join the Marines. You can join the Navy. So he got her to sign because he was only 17. My parents, like yours, are part of the greatest generation, right? And so he went to boot camp in Great Lakes, Michigan. Yeah, and then shipped out by train to San Francisco with his buddies. The train was delayed. The destroyer he was supposed to be on was already sailing out underneath the Golden Gate Bridge when they showed up and looked down into San Francisco Bay. And that destroyer was hit by eventually three Japanese torpedoes, and all hands were lost. So I mean,
Wow.
gosh, yeah. So then he came back. I guess he was 19 or 20. There was no baseball draft, of course. There was just tryout camp. So he went to a Cardinals tryout camp, and they liked him a lot. There were about 300 kids there, and he was the one they wanted to sign. And so the scout came to the house in University City and said, we'll give you $500 to sign. And his parents said, no, he's going to college. He's going to Washington University. So the older siblings begged to let him sign because he guaranteed that he would go to school. So he didn't sign, but he gave a handshake. And the next day, Chicago Cubs scout shows up, offers him $5,000. No, I handshake. It's just the Cubs. The Cubs always losing out. Whatever. So then he started in Class D. The Cardinals had many, many minor league teams, and he started in Class D in Southern Illinois, I think in Frankfort. I won the batting title and then went to C and then went to A, which was in Omaha. I was there for a couple years. It was, all league, whatever. It has a championship ring that my son Mark has, who was also quite a baseball player. And then went to Rochester in AAA, I think 1952. And spring training hurt his arm. I'll bet it was a labral tear, rotator cuff problem. And they wouldn't release him. So they said, well, we'll send you back to Omaha, get some physical therapy. There were no operations that could be done then. And they wouldn't release him because they were concerned, since he was a really good catcher and was smart, that he would become a coach or manager in another system. So he died at age 79, had never been released by the Cardinals because of the reserve clause. And so then during the summertime, he played in that Basin League, and that's the Bob Gibson story. And then went back to school, got a master's, and eventually a PhD in 1977, 2 years before I got my MD. So
he was a teacher at Clayton High School. Tell us about how he got to do that.
Well, that'll be part of the story that I like to tell at
Oh,
the
okay. We
very
can
end.
defer that.
My mother, though, she graduated from Wellston. I'm not sure if there's still Wellston High School in St. Louis. And she became, in the early days of commercial aviation, she applied for a so-called glamorous job as a flight attendant with Braniff Airlines, called a stewardess then, right? In those days, there weren't many good jobs for women. And the job interviewer loved her. I mean, who wouldn't, right? And instantly hired her, despite most of the folks who were getting those jobs were women who were college graduates. And so she then subsequently they got married and they moved back to St. Louis. And when she was 38, she had breast cancer, which she battled and beat, had a radical mastectomy operation done, cobalt radiation therapy, and survived. And she was like the greatest mom ever. So she was the soft side compared to my dad, who was the harder side.
What was it like? Or maybe that'd be part of your story. What was it like having your dad at the school where you were at?
Well, it was, he's a legendary, iconic guy. And I'll tell some stories that sort of signify that. My brother Lance and I both had him in class. He actually played a big role in starting the Advanced Placement American History program nationally, which are mostly college professors. And so each year he would go up to Princeton to grade the tests and come up with the questions for the next year. So I had him for Advanced Placement American History as a junior, as well as most of the folks from the great high school class, Clayton High School class of 1971, had him. Tom Marcus, Gingy Sharf, Tim Poor, Peter Krantz, so on and so forth. And he was just an iconic guy, and of course was the baseball coach, and he was quite a guy. So I played for him for 4 years. I had him in class. I don't think I said maybe 10 words the entire year. And so I recall that it was time for us to take the SATs at the end of junior year. And he said, well, you ought to take the math achievement tests, I guess they were called, and you should
Yeah.
take the American history test. I go, well, Dad, we're only up to like World War II. He says, take the test, take the test. So I go, I do the SATs, and then I do the achievement test. And he was the one who was in charge of administering or being the administrator for doing these at Clayton High School on a Saturday. And so he said, so how do you do? I think the SATs were okay. He said, well, how'd you do in the American history test? And I said, gosh, I think I may have gotten them all right, except for one I really didn't know. And it was a question about Brown versus Board of Education. And he says, well, what'd you answer? And he goes, oh, you got that wrong. So, so the results come back and I get an 800 on the American history test. And I just thought that was just a big laugh. So it was funny. So yes, I had him in class, and you'll hear some of the stories actually that come from like Peter Krantz and Gingy Sharf and others.
So what did you like to do when you were in the elementary school and middle school and high school?
Well, for me, it was like sports. Anything with the ball. Yeah, I mean, I was a sports maniac. But the transformational event for me, Stan, was um, having the opportunity to attend Clayton Public Schools. So when I was in grade school, our family lived in Hazelwood, and this was before the time of the Interbelt. So my dad would drive, it'd be, maybe a 60-minute drive each way. He'd go around the airport. And we were living in Hazelwood, and it was growing rapidly. And I was about to start fifth grade, and I had 45 kids in the class. And so I came home. My dad asked, "Well, how's it going?" I said, "Well, we have a big class, but everybody's nice." He looked at me sternly. And at that time, if you taught in Clayton schools, your kids could go. So he looked at me sternly and he says, "You're coming with me to Clayton." And so he lugged me and my younger brother Lance to Merrimack Elementary School. Actually, that's where I met Gingy Sharp. She was like the smartest kid in the class, although she may have had some new competition, according to Miss Peterson, who was the fifth grade teacher. And of course, all the kids started French in third grade, so I had to catch up and went to summer school, I think, that summer to catch up in French. And then we all took this test in French at the end of sixth grade. And amazingly, I did well. I think I had the second highest score. The first highest score was Gail Courtney, whose life subsequently became, French and languages and things of that sort. So from day one, I loved Clayton schools. And so the following year, they bought probably the least expensive house in Clayton, 225 North Gay. You've been there before, I think.
Yes.
And it's right next to Gay Field, which is where the football field is. So there were fields there. So it's like for, the kid growing up who loves sports, it's like Nirvana. I mean, you can just go down there and just play, 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 play. And so my, so they bought this house for $25,000. This is what, 1964, 65. I had to switch, we had to switch to Maryland school. And so I had made a whole bunch of new friends. And my parents on a school teacher salary, they're really worried about the mortgage payment, so on and so forth. So they did virtually everything they themselves, renovation wise. And my mom went to work. She worked at Brown Shoe Company, which is right around the corner of, I think it still is, from Clayton High School. She worked for Mr. White as a secretary. So, my parents, I think, sacrificed. They really sacrificed so that I could have a Clayton education, and a Clayton education, I think, inspired me to dream and to achieve. Great teachers and a bunch of smart kids, most of whom you're going to interview coming up. So.
Yeah, it was a pretty phenomenal class, I'd have to say, in terms of what we all did after we graduated. What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were young?
Well, as I mentioned, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 13 years old, and I was inspired by her courage and by the really kind and charismatic surgeon, a guy named Dr. Sam Snyder at the Jewish Hospital of St. Louis, who operated on her and cured her. And so, but if you asked me at age 13 what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would say either a Major League Baseball shortstop or a surgeon. And so I read by the time I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be a surgeon if baseball didn't work out, which as it turns out, it didn't because of the shoulder injury. I had the same shoulder injury as my father. So then my son, who was a very talented left-handed pitcher, had arm problems as well. So we're like golden retriever dogs with bad hips. We got the Adzick shoulder or some such because I hurt my shoulder pitching as a senior in high school. My dad didn't want me to do it. And our team was not very very good, so I pitched. Well, you were doing the stats. We had certainly more losses than wins, and I had a really good arm. But now once I was hurt, and I recall going to see the St. Louis Cardinals physician, Stan London, and the trainer, and I couldn't even raise my arm above my shoulders. So when I played in college, they'd sneak me in the outfield, and then when the DH rule came through, I was the DH. I was a switch hitter. So, and then Dr. Snyder took care of me when I was a sophomore in high school. Earl Hopper was the coach, and we had, well, Peter Kurtz can corroborate this. He would hit us doing these crazy drills where you had two guys going one-on-one, side by side, one in each direction, and I had a collision with Jeff Hartz, my back, and my left side really hurt, and I, of course, kept playing. And then finally, we were doing a scrimmage with the varsity, and I went up to Dawson Pikey and I said, I think I have a kidney injury. I was like, what, 14 years old or something. He says, well, you better go upstairs to the locker room and pee. So I went upstairs and peed, and like pure blood comes out. And I thought, God, I'm 14 years old and I'm going to die. Gosh, what a shame. So so my parents picked me up, brought me into the Jewish hospital, and Sam Snyder, the same surgeon who took care of my mom, took care of me. And the dictum then was for a kidney injury like this, you do a nephrectomy, you take the kidney out. And he said, no, let's wait, put me at bed rest for like a week, and eventually things cleared, and he saved me, and he saved my kidney. I recall the cheerleaders coming to visit me. Who was it? Susie Lipsitz and Carol Mitchell and Kim Gunnerman, so on and so forth, which was a highlight if you're stuck in the hospital not knowing where you're gonna, do or what. And then to follow the same theme with Dr. Snyder, when I was a college freshman, my mom went in for like a follow-up visit with Dr. Snyder. And she said, well, she told him that I wanted to become a surgeon, and were there any summer research jobs in the surgical research laboratory at Jewish Hospital for her son? Way to go, Mom. So Dr. Snyder spoke to Dr. Arthur Bowie, who is a cardiothoracic surgeon and the chief of surgery at the Jewish Hospital, and had an NIH-funded surgical research laboratory. And he gave me as a summer job. I was paid in his lab during my 4 college summers, and I learned a lot of science, and he was a mentor, and I wanted to be just like him. And he was a Missourian who had gone to Westminster College, where Churchill gave the Iron Curtain speech in the 1940s. And then he had gone to Harvard Medical School and trained at the Massachusetts General Hospital. So I wanted to be just like Dr. Bowie. And Dr. Bowie subsequently became chief of surgery at Yale. So Dr. Snyder, big influence in that. So I was just so lucky. It was a little bit serendipity, So.
So did you always know you wanted to go to Harvard, or did you have other schools that you had in mind?
Well, the college thing, let's see. Well, sports were an important hook. So during the summer after junior year, I was invited to the select basketball camp run by Easy Ed McCauley, who had played at St. Louis U, 6'11", and then played for the Hawks, and was the youngest inductee into the NBA Hall of Fame at age 32. So he had a select camp. It was in Southern Illinois, drew kids from the Midwest, mostly Missouri, Illinois, Kansas, a little bit of Iowa. And so I don't know, maybe Coach Pikey got me an invite. So I went, and had the good fortune to be the MVP and the high score. And there were a lot of college coaches there. So and so these college coaches showed up, and so what was it? There was a list: Missouri, Norm Stewart, St. Louis U, Washington U, Northwestern, which is where you went to school, Ohio State, Indiana. Their new coach was a guy named Bobby Knight. I don't think that would have worked out very well. Illinois, the Illini, Purdue, Arkansas, LSU, which is where Press Maravich was, who was Pete Maravich's father.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just to show you how things have changed as far as recruiting goes, at the start of senior year, a sports reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch showed up at Clayton High School to interview me, and he knew about the McCauley camp and the MVP thing. And he wanted to write about that as the centerpiece of an article, but he also wanted the inside story about where I wanted to attend college and played basketball. And I'd read the biography of Bill Bradley, who you know all about,
Yes.
and grew up in Crystal City, Missouri, south of St. Louis. Been an All-American basketball player for 3 years at Princeton because you couldn't play as a freshman. You had to play freshman, and was college player of the year. Went to the Final Four with Princeton. Became a Rhodes Scholar. And then I played for the Knicks for, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 years. I was in the Hall of Fame, and then became U.S. Senator from New Jersey, right? Your former state prior to
Right.
moving back to Missouri. So I knew I wanted to go to medical school. So I mentioned to this reporter my admiration for Bill Bradley and an Ivy League education. And then I was exposed to kids at Clayton who were going to really great universities. I mean, thinking in our class, the great class of 1971, we had 5 people who went to Yale, I think. Gingy, Peter Grintz, Tom Marcus, Paula Hugh, and Becky Dirks, right? So, I mean, that's remarkable for a class of 200 kids. And all the other schools, Amherst and Northwestern and Swarthmore and so on and so forth. So because I was exposed to that, it would have, it sort of broadened my horizons. So he writes this small story about me in the sports section of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I don't know if Tim Poor can dig it up or what, but the title was "Adzick Wants Ivy League." I'm not making this up. So, and I was sort of clueless. So soon thereafter, the presidents of the St. Louis alumni clubs, individually for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Dartmouth, made recruitment visits to our little house, 225 North Gay. And when I mentioned to the Princeton guy that I hadn't applied to Princeton yet, it was like November or December. He said, "Don't worry. I brought the Princeton application along with me. We can fill it out together." I'm kind of going, really? Are you kidding me? Pete Carell is the new coach there. And another time I'll tell you the story about meeting Pete Carell. So I made recruitment visits to each of those schools. Each of the 4 coaches had videotapes, and I guess of some of our games. And the other big time college basketball coaches were flummoxed. They were puzzled, and then I guess they must have looked elsewhere for recruits. So I settled on going to Harvard College, and I entered Harvard College, I guess, when we all started school in the fall of 1971, because I had a bunch of APs, I think 4 APs. At those days, you could enter as a sophomore. So what was it? English, American history, calculus, and chemistry. And I think Gingy Sharp and others, I think she entered Yale as a sophomore. I still stayed for 4 years for sports. And while I was, so my concentration or major was history and science, which was a part of the undergraduate component of the graduate Department of History of Science. And that proved to be really perfect for me because it was a small number of students as opposed to some of the other majors like government or economics or history, which were huge. I could take interesting history courses, which I loved, as well as the pre-med courses that had to be taken. And it would have been a mistake to try and do a science major in biology or biochemistry because of all the labs and playing sports stuff. So that's a long-winded response for how I decided on colleges.
And what you played both baseball and basketball at Harvard?
Correct. Yeah. So we had a good baseball team. We went to the College World Series in 1973 and 1974. Interestingly, when my father was really sick toward the end of his life, he said the ballpark in Omaha, which you would be familiar with, was built in 1950. And it was known as Memorial Stadium in the light of World War II. And then subsequently, the mayor of Omaha was named Johnny Rosenblatt. So they renamed the stadium Rosenblatt Stadium, right? So that's where the Cardinals played, the Omaha Cardinals, and that's where the College World Series was. So my dad and I were talking about that, and he goes, "Oh yeah," and he says, "You know, I hit the first home run at Memorial Stadium," and I said, Dad, you never told me that. He says, you never asked me. Are you kidding me?
Little, little nuggets that come out, huh?
Oh my goodness. So we had good teams. We always had in 1973 our first it was a double elimination and we were 0 for 4, but with the 2 years. But in 73 it was USC. And this guy named Freddie Lynn was playing center field, and I'm thinking, God, this guy is like really good. And 2 years later, in 1975, playing for the Red Sox, he was not only Rookie of the Year, but he was also MVP. So, and then in all fairness, I think around 1979 or 1980, they scrambled the 8 regionals. So at that time, when I was in school, only the Northeastern teams were in the Northeastern Regional. So that was, so once they scrambled, so you could have, in theory, USC and the Northeastern Regional. So since that time, there's not been a single Northeastern school that's been one of the 8 that's gone to Omaha.
So how many years did you play basketball and baseball at Harvard?
Two basketball and 3 baseball. Basketball, we had a good team, but Penn and Princeton were always better. With my shoulder, which is better, although if I try and throw now, my arm feels like it's going to throw up. When I threw out the opening pitch for Adzick Field, I thought my arm was just going to just drop.
Wow.
So, but it affected. So frankly, it affected the jump shot as I would be here as opposed to here. But it just got to be too much with school. So just way too much. So I had to make a choice.
So what was your first full-time job?
Let's see. I have some notes here. Wow, I got a lot of notes. So ages 10 through 14, once we moved to Clayton, I had lawn mowing jobs. I was a hustler. It was like BYO lawnmower, breaking around the lawnmower, and I cut lawns around the neighborhood in Clayton. And we were right on the edge of the Clayton Ladue border, so there were some homes down in Ladue on Colonial Lane that I cut. And then the summer after freshman year in high school, there was a shortage of workers for Clayton public schools. So my dad somehow got me a job as a painter. So how old would I have been? We were probably 15, summer after. So I worked with a guy who had run his own painting company and then was 70 years old. And so he was working for Clayton. He was very, very kind to me. His name was Walter Bales. So we did painting on the outside of the Bracken building and then on the inside of the elementary school at Merrimack and Maryland, and I think DeMond and also McMorrow. So then I was paid, I think $1.50 an hour, which was it seemed to me to be a lot when I was, that age, although it really wasn't. And then after sophomore year, I worked for the city of Clayton. There was a job opportunity there, and I think I was the only high school kid. The other folks who worked were full time, mostly African American, and so. I worked on the street crew, tarring streets using the jackhammer, painting street signs, cutting down trees and tree limbs, and mowing grass, particularly along Wydown Boulevard. You recall Wydown Boulevard, right?
Sure.
The median there.
Mm-hmm.
And tarring the streets in 100 degrees heat and nearly 100% humidity in the St. Louis was not fun. The pay was $1.50 an hour. That's $12 a day. And I learned how to drive a dump truck. So I must have been 16. I must have been hazardous. I think I almost took out a corner mailbox once with the dump truck. And then after junior year, I worked again for the school district of Clayton. So they must have needed some help in tarring or doing blacktop for all the playgrounds in the elementary schools. Got very, very tan, probably to develop skin. That's probably why I've had a few skin cancers. And then that was hot work. And I got a raise for $2 an hour. After senior year, I was a coach and camp director for the elementary school kids in the Clayton Parks and Recreation, and you had to keep a lid on those kids, or else there'd be like a mutiny. It was unbelievable. And then while working summer jobs during high school, I played baseball and basketball in the evenings and on weekends. Thinking about even when I was tired from working all day, but I had a lot of energy, as we all did. On weekends, I would play basketball in the inner city of St. Louis, which led to some interesting situations. Um, I developed a friendship with a guy named Marshall Rogers, who was a star player guard at Sumner High School. Went to Kansas. He was a St. Louis Post-Dispatch scholar athlete, like I was. So we went on the trip to Chicago together after senior year, and very, very quick, about 6 foot, great springs, good shot. And so he went to Kansas. I don't think he got along with the coach. Transferred, I think, to American University. His junior year, he led the nation in scoring, 36.8 points per game, and then was drafted in the second round by the Golden State Warriors, and then had injuries. And then I came back to St. Louis as a substitute teacher. He was really a nice guy. And developed diabetes, lost both legs, amputation, and must have died 10 years ago. And then also during the summer, I played in the St. Louis County Men's Baseball League, which was mostly college players and older men and some ex-professional players. And I had to be by far the youngest kid. I played center field and then subsequently I played shortstop. And we traveled all around during the week. We would go to all around and play, usually town teams. But all this laid the groundwork for personal success in sports, and so that led to I guess all Metro and baseball and basketball, and all state, whatever. St. Louis Post-Dispatch scholar athlete, and so I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
So then, when you finished medical school, what was your first job after med school?
Well, the way it works in surgical training, it like takes forever, right? But you gotta
Yeah.
like the process. It's 100 hours a week, just before hours. So I graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1979, and then did general surgery training at really may have been the best place, the Massachusetts General Hospital. And then that was 5 years, and then took 2 years sort of off after getting married, and went to San Francisco to do research with Michael Harrison, who was my mentor, who was the idea behind the fetal surgery stuff. And then came back and finished at the Mass General as chief resident, and then did a 2 year, very, very, very intense pediatric surgery fellowship at Boston Children's. So I finished at age 35, and that was just around where our one and only son was born. So, and then I went back to UCSF on the faculty, and that's where we did all the initial clinical work in fetal surgery. And then was recruited for this, I guess, prestigious position as surgeon in chief at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is known as CHOP, CHOP for short, and Sierra Koop Professor of Pediatric Surgery at Penn. So you were called Dr. Koop, right? From
Yes, I do.
because after he had been surgeon chief there for 30 years, and was a real pioneer in pediatric surgery, he was under the Reagan administration. He was the Surgeon General, and I think the Reagan administration thought he was going to do everything they wanted him to do, and he didn't. He took on the AIDS epidemic. He took on big tobacco. He helped us a lot with transplantation in kids. He always did the right thing. He was really a giant.
So tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, the kind of surgery you do, and how that came to be.
Well, the big view is a tremendous privilege for me to participate in this dawn of a new era in pediatric surgery. And so for the first time, we can operate safely before birth to create life-threatening, otherwise fatal birth defects, and in the big view, I enjoy battling with the unsolved problems in pediatric surgery. I enjoy teaching the next generation like my father did, and making a difference in the youngest patients' lives. So, and Dr. Koop said to operate and save a child is to save a lifetime. So that's pretty cool. So the concept of repairing birth defects before birth came up because in the 80s, early 80s, for the first time by ultrasound, we could detect anatomic birth defects. And there were some that were caused progressive damage before birth, like obstructed urinary tracts, certain heart defects, lung tumors, things of that sort. And if you were a pediatric surgeon and you waited till the baby was born, then you were too late. Just like if you took care of an adult who had already had a heart attack or had already had metastatic cancer, you were too late. So the answer was to maybe there's a way to fix these problems before birth, which admittedly was a very controversial and very crazy idea because there had to be at least 100 reasons why you couldn't operate on the pregnant mother, technical issues, preterm labor. What do you do with the bag of waters with the amniotic fluid, whatever. So I went out when I heard about this guy, Mike Harrison, who was 10 years ahead of me at Harvard Medical School and 10 years ahead of me at the Mass General. And as a pediatric surgeon starting at UCSF, he had this idea. So when I found out about this, I thought, gosh, that makes perfect sense. So I left the vortex of Harvard Medical School, went out beyond Route 128 around Boston, got away from the force fields of Harvard Veritas, and then went to San Francisco, which was the best thing ever. Besides, I just got married. So, so we did work to see if this was even possible. We did work in fetal animal models, in fetal sheep and in fetal monkeys. So why fetal sheep? Well, fetal sheep are about the same size as human fetuses. And there was a group at University of California, San Francisco that was studying the physiology, cardiac, lung, other physiology of chronically catheterized fetal sheep. And the good thing about sheep is that the mother has a very thin uterine wall and they don't go into preterm labor, whereas that's the opposite for primates, monkeys, and for humans. So we developed animal models of these birth defects, studied their pathophysiology, and then developed techniques to repair them to see if you could end up with a good kid, because you certainly wouldn't want to do this clinically unless you were sure that there could be benefit. And then we did work at the California Primate Research Center, which is in the middle of the state in Sacramento, actually at UC Davis. That they had 2,500 breeding colonies for rhesus monkeys. And so we could get time-dated pregnant monkeys, develop the techniques like to open the uterus. I developed a uterine stapling device that could bloodlessly open the uterus and keep the membranes tacked up against the muscle layer of the uterus and pinch off all the blood vessels because the pregnant uterus is highly vascular. Develop ways to monitor the fetus, so on and so forth. And then we could study how these mother monkeys did after the fetal surgery pregnancy when they returned to the breeding colony, and there was no impairment of their future reproductive capacity, which was important because if there had been an impairment, then there would be very limited clinically what we could do. So we worked through all that and then started to do things clinically cautiously in the late 80s. With a lot of failure because we took on the worst cases. And then we got better by the early 90s. We were on a roll, still doing a lot of work in the laboratory. And there's a sort of ping pong back and forth to overcome all the unsolved problems, how you prevent preterm labor, all those sorts of things. And then by the early 90s, I had, I think, 12 research fellows who were taking time off from their surgical training or were already trained as a pediatric surgeon who would take full time off to do research with us to work on these issues. And I think just about all of them are professors all around the world. And so let me give you an example of things that we treat in high volume. One is spina bifida. So spina bifida is a problem where early in gestation, 4 to 6 weeks during embryologic life, the tissue coverings around the spinal cord don't form. So the spinal cord is exposed. There's a hole in the back. And the higher it is on the spinal cord that's exposed, the more nerves are affected. So that leads to paralysis. These are the wheelchair kids. And it's also linked to hydrocephalus, fluid on the brain, brain damage, things of that sort. And I'd always been taught in medical school that this was a done deal, that the outcomes were fixed in stone. But we figured out in fetal sheep model that there was a second hit. So the tissues don't form around the spinal cord. But then the big problem is in the third trimester is that most of the amniotic fluid, here's the way amniotic fluid works, all right? Amniotic fluid is mostly fetal pee. So we all did this before birth. We peed into the amniotic sac, then we swallowed it, absorbed it, and went back to the mom. We all did this. We were all urine swallowers, all right? So in the third trimester, that urine becomes very concentrated and quite neurotoxic. So it damages the exposed spinal cord. In addition, there's fluid around the brain that's made and that bathes the brain and the spinal cord. And before birth with spina bifida, there's this hole in the back, and that fluid just runs out the back. And the back part of the brain, the cerebellum or the hindbrain, comes down and it gets stuck in the neck or the cervical part of the spinal canal. And it interferes with circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. And so the brain becomes hydrocephalic with it, and that causes damage. And also the nerves that regulate breathing and swallowing are compressed by this hindbrain herniation, and that leads to a lot of bad consequences. So we showed it in sheep initially. I had a big publication in Nature Medicine, which is a prestigious medical journal, in 1995, where we did this work in sheep. And then subsequently, when I was at CHOP, it's not the biggest center for fetal diagnosis and treatment in the world. We showed in a randomized trial in conjunction with my colleagues at UCSF and Vanderbilt that if you did a randomized trial comparing fetal surgery for spina bifida to repair after birth, which was the usual standard, that the babies who were treated before birth did substantially better, much higher likelihood of being able to walk and not having a shunt tube for hydrocephalus and so on and so forth. So now that sort of spread throughout the world. So we've done many of those cases, and that was a breakthrough. Another problem that we treat frequently is called twin-twin transfusion syndrome. Okay, so here's the setup. Identical twins, one uterus, of course, two separate amniotic sacs. And there's a single placenta. The placenta is like a disc that connects the fetus to the mother through the umbilical cord. It's like a disc. For twins, there should be two placentas, but in this problem, identical twins, only one shared placenta, and there's an imbalance in circulation from one side of the placenta to the other, such that one twin gets too much blood and goes into heart failure and will go on to die, and the other twin doesn't get enough blood and goes into kidney failure, and there's no amniotic fluid around that twin. It's like shrink wrapped because it's not making urine because it's in renal failure. So we've shown, and others have shown, that if we can treat this successfully in the high number of cases with fetoscopic laser therapy. So what is that? So in this case, the mother is just sedated. Abdomen's prepped. A fetoscope is put through the mother's abdominal wall, through the uterine wall. You visualize the placenta. You see the culprit unpaired vessels, and then you use a laser fiber to photocoagulate them, and you interrupt that pathophysiologic cascade with a high degree of success. So you've gone from a situation where both twins would die to at least one, and usually two twins survive. So we do about 100 of those cases a year, for example. But that's also spread throughout the world, and with folks that we've trained and others, not only in the United States and Canada, but also in Asia and in Europe and in the Far East. So for fetal surgery for spina bifida, I mean, that's a big deal. Mother goes to sleep under general anesthesia, has a laparotomy performed like for a C-section, use the uterine stapling device to open the uterus. We see then the spina bifida problem. We close it precisely, watertight, so no more neurotoxic amniotic fluid can come in and no more cerebrospinal fluid leaks out. And then you need to keep the mother out of preterm labor. We've had a high degree of success, and it's very gratifying to see this sort of thing, as well as other fetal surgical interventions.
So how many of these have you done over the years?
Well, as far as so let's put it in perspective. So the Center for Fetal Diagnosis and Treatment at CHOP, 1995. So we've had over 33,000 referrals, and only 10% of them require fetal surgery. The rest, if the fetus is salvageable, just require the sort of care that we can provide at CHOP. And I actually went to business school because I'm a maniac. Around 2002, I went to Carnegie Mellon, mostly remote, got a master's in medical management. That helped me qualify for my job as surgeon in chief because I needed help. And also, I did the business plan for a special delivery unit based at CHOP where pregnant mothers who were healthy carrying fetuses with birth defects could have their care and deliver, which is the first of its kind. Now that concept has spread. So 33,000 referrals since 1995 from all 50 states, of course, more than 70 countries, close to 3,000 fetal surgery cases. So yeah, that's sort of what we do.
Yeah.
And I do pediatric general surgery as well, thoracic and abdominal and endocrine and all kinds of stuff. So
Well, it's very impressive. Congratulations on those achievements.
thank you.
What's a hobby or interest that you enjoy outside of your medical career?
Well, I'm a maniac, right? Work like a maniac because I am a maniac. Um, well, first of all, my wife's Sandy. So we met. She was a nurse at the Massachusetts General in the cardiac surgical intensive care unit. Wanted nothing to do with me because her mother, who had been an MGH nurse, says, "Sandy, you're very well rounded. You like to sail. She's a world-class sailor. Windsurf, ski, do all those things. I advise you do not date any physicians and particularly avoid surgical residents." So eventually, I guess I wore her down. So she's a world-class sailor. She was the first female college All-American sailor. She, after college, represented the United States in the Women's World Championships a couple times. And so her parents, since she was a little girl, have gone to Nantucket off the coast of Cape Cod, 30 miles off of Cape Cod. And so we have a house there. And so she sails there, particularly in August, Nantucket Race Week. This past August, she was the skipper for American Eagle, which is a 12-meter America's Cup boat from 1964 with an all-women crew, which she liked. And she's a world-class sailor. So I support her. I'm Sandy's benefactor. I'm her benefactor. I get seasick, particularly if the sea's rough. So a man's got to know his limitations, basically. So we like to go to Nantucket. We spent a fair amount of time there this year. 2 weeks in July, 2 weeks in August, maybe a week in the fall, maybe a week in the winter. And I really like it there. The restaurants are great. Beach is great. It's a good milieu. It's getting a little bit too upscale, but we have our own little place and can live in our own little world. And the family gathers there, and his son Mark and his wife and four grandkids now go there. And so I like that.
All right. Well, let's switch now to our Fave 5 questions. Do you like to read? And if so, what do you like to read?
Well, I like to read biographies. Thomas Carlyle, the 19th century Scottish historian, and this sounds sexist, but he wrote that the history of the world is but the biography of great men. I know Ginger will be listening to that, and she'll say great women too, Scott. I go, no question about it. I like biographies like Andrew Roberts' biography of Winston Churchill, Walking with Destiny. Walter Isaacson's books, Benjamin Franklin. He's big. Franklin is big in Philadelphia, right? Einstein, Isaacson, Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci. One I read last was The Code Breaker. It's about Jennifer Doudna, who was the one who figured out CRISPR technology for gene editing. Brilliant. And won a Nobel Prize. So that's called The Code Breaker, Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing and the Future of the Human Race. So I like biographies.
Okay. What do you like to eat?
Um, Seafood. Now, when we grew up in St. Louis, I mean, the only time I could get seafood was Friday in the cafeteria because the Catholic kids couldn't eat meat, so they had fish there. I mean,
Yeah.
but now, got around the Eastern Seaboard, and it's I like seafood. I like steak and baked potatoes, like a good St. Louis boy. I like from our times in Italy, risotto. I'm actually gluten free, gluten sensitive, I guess. So that sort of narrows the window for various pastas. So,
Oh, yeah. Did you pick up any of the Philly favorites since you lived there?
well, I'm gluten free now, so I can't do cheesesteaks. But we, of course, are Phillies fans and Eagles fans, of course.
So if I were to come visit you in Philadelphia and you were going to take me out to dinner, where would you take me?
Well, first of all, I would bring you to Nantucket because the restaurants there are fabulous.
Yeah.
There are fabulous restaurants here too, and then we
Yeah.
belong to some clubs, Marion Craig Club, Chef's Superb, Corinthian Yacht Club, where Sandy has been Commodore, first female Commodore since the club was founded in 1892. It just took a little while. Oh my goodness, first female Commodore. Are you kidding me? So
Where in Nantucket do you like to go?
the Sea Grill, Chanticleer, Languedoc, American Seasons. We belong to Nantucket Yacht Club because it's almost impossible to get into, but we got into it because of Sandy. They didn't give a rat's ass about me and whatever. So we want Sandy. So they have a great chef.
All right, switching to music. What's a favorite song or musician or album or concert that you can name?
I'm not a huge music guy, but I guess from the time that my father was playing Johnny Cash records in the house, I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. Wow, the Ring of Fire. I would say country, Trace Atkins. He had that one song, I Left Something Turned On at Home. Are you kidding me? Josh Turner, Garth Brooks, but also the Boston Pops who play on Nantucket, Philly Pops, Philadelphia Orchestra, and not strictly music, but we enjoy going to the theater in Philadelphia.
So when you were younger, did you ever buy a record? What was the first record you bought?
I have no idea. I have no idea. But I do recall the first concert I went to.
Okay.
I went with Gingy Sharp to see the Birds, I guess. The Birds, is that right?
Yeah,
At Washington
I was
University
at that concert.
during the summer after senior year. So she dragged me there and dragged me there, and it was fun. So we
Have
enjoyed
you
it.
attended a concert more recently?
I went to one Bruce Springsteen concert. Besides the pops and things of that sort, no.
Okay. All right. Well, now we're coming to sports, which is right up your alley. What sports do you enjoy watching these days?
Well, back to concerts. I can't believe that my 6-year-old granddaughter, we have a granddaughter who's 6, and then grandsons who are 5, 2.5, and 1.5. I can't believe that my granddaughter has been to not one, but 2 Taylor Swift concerts, one in Nashville and then one in London. I mean, come
Wow.
on.
Wow.
That's incredible. Sports, you can imagine basketball and baseball are the biggies. And what do I do to stay in shape? Well, I figured out being so busy that the best way to do it was to get a trainer. I use this thing called the X Force, which you can read about, which I did shortly before this um, interview. And I've been doing this for about 25 years, 2 to 3 times a week. The trainer is important because you're paying for it. You got to show up and make sure you don't do anything stupid. It's mostly strength training.
So, do you have a favorite athlete or team or a sports memory?
Oh yeah, you kidding me? Not in comparison to you and your son. St. Louis Cardinals in the 60s. I mean, Stan Musial, Kenny Boyer, who was a very good friend with my dad because they played together on the Omaha Cardinals. Bob Gibson, we've already talked about Tim McCarver, Mike Shannon, Dick Groat. who was also an All-American in basketball at Duke, as I recall. Bill White, Kurt Flood, who tested unsuccessfully the reserve clause, very courageous. Julian Javier. And Nick Robbins and I would take the Redbird Express bus from the shopping center.
Westroads.
Yeah. And we would take it all. And my dad, since he was former Cardinal, would he would get grandstand tickets. And so we take the bus in, and then we get ticket stubs for the box seats. I mean, around the fifth inning, we'd sneak down, and then I'd be right behind home plate, seeing how hard Bob Gibson threw and what a fierce competitor he was, and how he would knock folks down like right and left. I enjoyed the Miracle on Ice in 1980 Olympics. I enjoyed the Boston Celtics in the 1980s. It was once said that Larry Bird plays basketball better than anyone else in the world does anything else. Of course, Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the 80s. The 2004 Boston Red Sox, who overcame the curse of the Bambino. The 2008 world champion Philadelphia Phillies. The Super Bowl champs, Eagles in 2018 and most recently in 2024. I enjoyed my son Mark's baseball teams. He was a very accomplished left-handed pitcher, highly recruited out of college. We had 24 of the 30 major league teams come to the house when he was a senior because they thought he had like Cole Hamels stuff. So if we draft this kid in the first round, he doesn't sign. If he goes to college, I'm going to lose my job. So we made it clear that he was going to go to college. So he went to Wake Forest, and of course is afflicted with the Adzick arm. So I coached some of his teams. So there's stuff hanging here. I don't know if you can see it, but this is like the command bunker. I also have my dad's. When you were there for the opening of Adzick Field, right? So
yes, I was.
There was that they gave me a jersey, Clayton number 23, which is up on the wall here, and a bunch of Nebraska Baseball Hall of Fame, which is his. And cool. The command bunker. There we go.
What about the 76ers? You didn't mention them. Do you follow them?
I did when Allen Iverson
Yeah.
was playing, but not too much. Pro basketball. I guess when you get to playoff time, it's better.
Yeah.
I do like March Madness.
Matt, do you have a college team that you like?
Well, Villanova.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're about 3 miles away from where we live. So.
Yeah, the Final Four has been a favorite ritual for my son to maybe go
16, right?
16 together, and 21 of my own.
Wow.
In fact, the first one that I went to was 1978 in St. Louis, and it was because of Tom Marcus. He asked me to go, and I said, no, it's sold out. It's a hassle. I don't want. And he said, no,
you can always get tickets.
We went down.
Matter how much you're willing to pay.
We got actually at the game time, there were two vendors who were bidding down, so we bought them at face value. We did sit in the very top row of the arena, but that was the start. So that was my first one. I should have gone to the one in '73 in St. Louis when Bill Walton had his legendary game.
21 of 22.
Right.
That was unbelievable. That was, in 1971, UCLA won, and Henry Bippy was the guard and for UCLA, and Dawson Pikey and Earl Harper went, and this just showed him what I sort of worry about his judgment. Coach Pikey, he said, Scott's better than Henry Bippy. I'm kind of thinking, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, you mentioned that you were recruited by a lot of schools, including Washington U. One of the funny things about that was 1971, and Washington U decided to abolish their basketball team. And if you had gone there, you wouldn't have been playing basketball.
Well, no, that occurred during the year because the coach came on the news and said, we're going to lose the program, and we've got Scott Adzick and others. I'm kind of going. The guy playing that team was a Brentwood player. Well, you wouldn't have known because he was a year ahead of us. Scott Nunubel. He used to wear the wristbands. Scott Nunubel.
So when I got to Washington U in 1972, no basketball. So it was a bummer for me. So I had to go find a team to follow. So first I tried following UMSL because they had had some success in Division II,
Yeah.
but they weren't very good that year. So then finally I switched to St. Louis U, and they actually had a good team. And in fact, if you recall, when you had applied to Princeton
Yeah.
with the help of the guys coming to your house,
Yeah.
they invited those of us who had applied to Princeton that year to a game against St. Louis U. Do you
Against
remember
LSU.
that?
And I recall that Brian Taylor
Yes.
smoked him in the first half. And Princeton lost. I was at that game too. And I recall when I went up there as a recruit from the Newark, landed this and an assistant coach was there to meet me. And then we drove down the turnpike, which was a lot worse than it is now. And I'm thinking, what sort of God-forsaken place is this? So so we arrive in Princeton on that Nassau Street. It's nice, as you know. And they said, well, Coach Carl's going to meet you for lunch. And at some sort of delicatessen restaurant. So I go in there, and Coach Carell's a little guy, and to do some. And there are two assistant coaches there. So there's Coach Carell across from me, and I'm 17 from whatever, and then the two assistant coaches. So he's telling me about Princeton. He says, "Well, what would you like to eat?" I go, "Well, what's good, Coach Carell?" He says, "Well, the sandwiches are good." So I said, "I'll put pastrami sandwich." So he brings out this humongous sandwich. I mean, it doesn't even fit on the screen. So I'm eating the sandwich, and I ask a couple of questions about Bill Bradley. He says, "Well, I didn't coach Bill Bradley. That was Butch Van Benekoff. I've been at Princeton two years," and then he's going on and on. And I wasn't saying anything because I'm eating this humongous sandwich. So I finished the sandwich, and he says, "Would you like another sandwich?" And I'm like, I'm the polite Clayton, Missouri kid. Yes, sure, yes, sir, Coach Carroll. Bring in another huge sandwich. I'm eating the sandwich, and so he says, finally, he says, "Now, Scott, at your home in St. Louis, how big is your garage?" And I'm looking at the assistant coaches who are like frowning, like, what's this all about? And I'm thinking, I'm 17, but I'm thinking that's a weird question. So I tell him the truth. I say, "Coach Grill, we don't have a garage." He stands up in the middle of the restaurant, goes, "Fast, fantastic." So the restaurant's crowded, and everybody's like looking at him like he's wacko. And the assistant coaches are saying, "What's all this about?" So he sits back down and he says, "Let me explain. I've been at Princeton now for two years. And as a rule, kids that have grown up in a 2, 3, 4 car garage, they don't dive for the loose ball. They don't take the charge. They fold under full court pressure late in the day, late in the game. They don't step out of bounds for a baseline drive, whatever." He says, "Now, 1 car garage, kids, it's got a chance, but a no-car garage, kid, we need you at Princeton." So then I remember in Jadwin Gym, it was new, I think. And this was, I'm sure, against NCAA rules, but I played. And you had told me about Brian Taylor, and you had told me about Ted Manakis. You had
Right.
told me. You had told me. You had told me. So they were there, and we're playing, and I'm guarding Brian Taylor, and he's guarding me, and I'm thinking, this guy is quick. But I did all right. But it was quite an experience. Pete Carell. Oh, he also after that he says, "I'm looking for PhDs. PhDs. You know what a PhD is?" I go, "Well, my dad is taking all these sabbaticals to get a PhD." No, 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 no. Looking for poor, hungry, driven PhD.
Yeah, Ted Manakis was the pride of Fort Lee, New Jersey. He had played
There you
against
go.
Tenafly. And Brian Taylor, if you remember, went on and played for the Nets. He was on their
Well,
championship
he
teams.
he as a hardship after junior year, when I was a freshman, he was a junior, and he signed, and he had a good career. He's
He
very
did.
quick, very
The
quick.
the New York Nets of the ABA
Yeah.
featured him and Super John Williamson in the backcourt, and the front court you had Larry Keenan, Billy Paultz, and a little guy by the name of Julius Irving.
Oh,
It was
little
pretty
guy.
good.
Oh my God, Dr. J, the best.
If you recall, there was an ABA team in St. Louis that came in
There was
'74, and that was the Spirits of St. Louis. I got the privilege of working for them for the two
Marvin
years.
Barnes,
Marvin
Marvin
Barnes and
Tire Iron Barnes, right?
Maurice Lucas. It was quite a
Maurice
time. In fact,
Lucas. Wow,
if you
those
talk to
those
Tom Marcus, that's like his favorite. That's my favorite thing to talk about is the
and
Spirits of
they
St. Louis.
had that ball. They had that
Yeah, the
ball.
red, white, and blue ball. So now we're going to get to our final category, which is comedy. Is there anyone that makes you laugh? A comedian, a comedy show, comedy film, anything that enjoy?
I'll keep this brief because I'm
Okay.
probably running way over your time limit. Original cast of Saturday Night Live, of course. Eddie Murray, Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, Steve Martin. The guy who does the sports things for Wall Street Journal is hysterical. Jason Gay. Do you ever
No,
read
I
him?
haven't.
Jason Gay. He is hysterical. So I recommend that.
Okay. And who's the best at making you laugh, and who are you able to make laugh?
My son Mark is pretty funny
Okay.
and always optimistic, bright light. And but I can make my colleagues at Chop laugh, although they may laugh in part because I'm their boss. I don't know. So
All right. Well, it's time for a story. So, what story have you chosen to share with us?
what is I was going to talk about, as I mentioned, about my father.
Okay.
And I thought that'd be particularly pertinent since you, most of the folks you were going to interview, besides having already interviewed Gingy, had him for class. Just about everybody. I don't know if you had him as a senior.
I did not know.
Okay. You'd probably already done American
I
history.
knew your dad as baseball coach and as your dad, so that was my
Okay.
exposure to
So,
him.
I was just going to recite the speech I gave for the Distinguished Educator Award that he received posthumously 2016, and it involves it's one story, but it's actually four stories. So, so I had the distinct pleasure and privilege to accept the Distinguished Educator Award on his behalf at the Hall of Fame ceremony in 2016. And your brother's in the Clayton High School Hall of Fame, right?
Yes, he is.
As are Genji and I and others. The first story is from Dr. Peter Krentz from the great Clayton High School class of 1971. Now, Peter is the W.R. Gray Professor of Classics and History at Davidson College. So this is a story by a history professor about his favorite history teacher. Peter wrote, I took U.S. history from Mr. Adzick in 1970-71, my senior year. He was an inspiring teacher, and though I was not in the AP class, I made a 4 on the AP test, which I credit to his teaching. On my very first test, I made a 72. When I went in to talk to him about it, he said, a 72 is a very respectable grade. In 36 years as a college professor, I've used that line or a variation thereof countless times. I always hope it will have the same galvanizing effect on my students that it did for me. The second story comes from Dr. Virginia Sharp, known to us as Gingy, Hall of Fame inductee that same night in 2016. At that time, distinguished professor of history and associate provost at the University of New Mexico, also from the great Clayton High School class of 1971, which Stan Garfield belongs to, and a Yale graduate like Peter Krentz and Tom Marcus. Gingy wrote, Mr. Adzick, as he was when I took AP U.S. history from him in 1969 to 70, was the best teacher I've ever had, and the person who put me on the path to a career as a teacher and writer of history. I can remember those AP classes of decades ago as if they had happened yesterday. The civil rights and anti-Vietnam War movements were in full swing. We were just beginning to imagine what would come to be called an environmental consciousness, and we were listening to lots and lots of great and provocative rock music. Go Gingy. Great singer, by the way. Clayton High School students organized teach-ins, marched in demonstrations, attended speeches and symposia and rallies at Washington University. What a terrifying and wonderful time to be young and in the thick of change. As an aside, Ginger and I have been friends since we were in Miss Peterson's 5th grade class together at the Merrimack School. I was her senior prom date when she was crowned Claymo Queen, so I can attest that she was right in the thick of things. And then every day, long-haired boys and girls who had only recently been permitted the comfort of trousers in school faced the lion in his den. Mr. Adzick was a proud conservative, fond of quoting Douglas MacArthur. There is no substitute for victory, he would exclaim. And he led us from Jamestown to the Revolution, from the Civil War to the progressives and his idol, Teddy Roosevelt, with a room full of students who ranged from angry to doubting to on board with his views. Some of us took him on, and the discussions could get pretty heated. We learned to be prepared to defend our views with lots of evidence and with careful argument, and to keep thinking. Every time I enter my own classroom, I'm inspired by those heady, riveting debates, and I'm determined to hold my own students to Mr. Adzick's exacting standards. I loved history since I was a small child, but Mr. Adzick made me understand how history can come alive and why it matters for all of us now. I've been privileged to study with the finest educators in the country at Yale and Berkeley, among other places, but he was, hands down, the most passionate, informed, brilliant, and influential teacher I've ever known. He showed us the necessity of disciplined research, critical thinking, persuasive argumentation, clear writing, and most importantly, bravery. Third story comes from the late Andy Rockman, Clayton High School class of 1964. Shortly after my father's death on Christmas Day, 2006, Andy wrote an article about him entitled, "The Passing of the Gray Eagle." He wrote, "It is sobering to think Nick Adzick is no longer with us. He was a man we were in awe of, both in the classroom and on the baseball diamond. He was a man my late older brother had told me what a funny guy Nick Adzick was. While that was true, my brother failed to tell me what a tough and challenging teacher he was. Nick showed us movies of Hitler and the Holocaust, played tapes with personal accounts of brainwashing of American GIs by the Koreans, pounded into my head the westward movement thesis of Frederick Jackson Turner, which today I can remember clearer than my first girlfriend. Nick just didn't let you get by with standard tests. You had better write well or well, oh hell. And it seemed like you spent as much time in the library, thank you, librarian Eleanor Baer, I appreciate you now, as you spent in the classroom. We read heavy stuff, scholarly works and original documents, just not the usual history survey books. My greatest conquest was getting a 4, also known as an A, in Nick Adzick's American History course, but not because it put me in with some elite company, which it did, but because I truly learned the meaning of working my butt off. The baseball diamond presented a different Nick. He found little humor, in our early 1960s New York Mets sloppy play. Sometimes he'd get frustrated and throw batting practice because he couldn't put someone on the mound who could consistently get the ball over the plate. What a great athlete. I remember he was teaching me as a catcher how to snare high foul balls. He'd grab a fungo bat, somehow hit the ball straight up in the air, throw down the fungo bat, pick up the catcher's mitt, and catch the ball. He continually lamented, "When are you Jewish guys going to give me another Sandy Koufax?" Well, it's been over 40 years since I last saw him coaching a bunch of low-skilled guys to a baseball-winning season. I can still hear him yelling at me, "Rocco, bull your neck." The translation is, "Dig down deep for some extra effort." He referred to himself while coaching as the Gray Eagle. It's a term that truly described him. Prematurely gray, strong, wise, watchful, with the killer instinct. We had heard Nick Adzick played in the Cardinals minor league system, but had thrown his arm out. As much time as we shared, I don't recall his talking much about that part of his life. He had moved on. If he was bitter, he never let on. He was there to help us to become the best we could, which wasn't much. He never criticized us because we were unable to do even what he could still do. Thanks, Nick. The last story comes from me. I serve as the Surgeon-in-Chief at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and the C. Everett Koop Professor of Pediatric Surgery at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. My father transformed from Mr. Adzick to Dr. A at Clayton High School after his PhD in 1977, taught me and my brother Lance American history. If classmate Peter Krentz was here, I like this part, I would brag to him that I got a 5, not a 4, Peter, on the Advanced Placement American History test. But then again, it may have been my manifest destiny as Nick Adzick's son. There is no substitute for victory. He also coached my brother Lance and me in baseball at Clayton High School for 4 years. I'm a pediatric surgeon, and I also perform fetal surgery on babies with life-threatening birth defects, a pressure-packed profession. but there is no pressure compared to being the starting varsity baseball shortstop as a skinny 14-year-old freshman with my watchful Gray Eagle father as the head coach in 1968. His prowess as a teacher was legendary. He had a passion for excellence and a passion for service to others throughout his life. My father touched thousands of lives as a teacher and as a coach, and that includes many Clayton Alumni Hall of Fame inductees, past, present, and future. Henry Adams must have had extraordinary teachers like my father and mine when he wrote, "A teacher affects eternity. You can never tell where his influence stops." Dad used to come up with funny monikers to gently rib and motivate his students, like the baseball prima donnas in the 1980s. Recently, I found a gift from one of those teams that said it all. It was inscribed, "To Dr. A, from your prima donnas, you've been a coach, a teacher, and a friend. He taught me in the high school classroom, on the baseball diamond, at home, and in life. To me, he epitomized Clayton High School. If he and my mother were here tonight, together they would be most proud of his accomplished students. Like for many of you here tonight, a Clayton education inspired me to dream and to achieve, and my father was a big part of that. It is a distinct pleasure and privilege to accept the Distinguished Educator Award on behalf of Nick Adzick, PhD. Thank you." That's it.
That's a great tribute to your dad. Thanks for sharing that with us, Scott.
Okay.
I'd like to wrap up with a story of my own about Scott and his athletic career. And this is one that you'll not be surprised that I chose. It's the famous Berkeley game, our senior year, which I understand you have a tape of my play-by-play and sometimes play in your surgery.
I got that. I played that for an anesthesiologist who was from Northville, Michigan, who knew you and your son. He's moved to Toronto's Sick Kids Children's. Greg. I'm trying to think of his last name.
Greg Johnson.
Greg Johnson. And so, yes, I played it for him during a case so that he could really hear your prowess as an announcer. And as folks like Mike Durham, I guess I slashed in for a layup basket, and Mike Durham says, "Elgin Baylor." And then you hear Arnold Kling said after I'd hit a couple of jump shots, "If Adzick gets hot, that's the ball game."
He was prophetic. That was one thing about that broadcast, which was we broadcast on tape delay the next day after the game. I was in a math class with Mr. Wendt, and as you remember, Mr. Wendt was kind of a quiet, sort of taciturn teacher. Yeah. And the next day I went in, he said, "Well, I listened to your broadcast of the game last night. You sure do get excited."
There was a lot to get excited about.
There was. So in this particular game, I think we had lost to Berkeley at home that year, and this was our second game at Berkeley.
Exactly. We lost to Roderick Williams.
Roderick Williams was the hot shooter for Berkeley. And we fell down by 16 points in that game. So it didn't look good. A road game, the team we'd already lost to once, down 16. When we came back, and you were the spark that scored most of the points to get us back in the game. But some point in the second half, see if you remember this incident, there was a player on the other team that punched you in the stomach.
Yeah.
And at that particular, I'm not sure why that happened, you can explain, but then your dad, who was not officially involved in the basketball team, ran out onto the court. So I remember saying that Mr. Adzick has run out onto the court.
Unprecedented.
That's right. So anyway, tell us, how did that come about? How did that incident happen?
Well, we did not play well in the first half. They had a good team. What was the guy named Palazzo?
Yes, I think you're right.
Who punched me.
Yeah.
So we were down by 18 at half, and we go into the locker room, and Dawson Pikey is just indignant. He is just reaming us out right and left. And when we walked into the locker room, the two locker rooms were side by side. So we go in with the Berkeley players to the halftime, and they were up 18. And they're giving us like unmerciful shit. "You pussies from Clayton," blah 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 blah. So we didn't say anything. So we came back and played well. and Peter Krentz played well, and Gordon Slickman, the late Gordon Slickman Weir, had some key rebounds, and you kept saying, "What a stud! Gordon Slickman Weir pulled out that rebound. That's just unbelievable." And then at some point you said, "Let's hear from you, Mr. Adzick," or whatever meaning mean. And so we came back, and Arnold Clayton has that great comment: "If Adzick gets hot, that's the ball game." And then he did some sort of calculation that should have come from you, that we had, like, for each possession had scored an incredible amount of points, which he says is almost impossible. So he had it all figured out. And then something about the consecutive free throw record. So it was down. So they had their best players had fouled out, just like I and some of the other Clayton players had fouled out when we played them the first time. So there was like we're up by 6 or 8. We'd gone to a stall and then scored a couple baskets. And yeah, I recall Arnold saying, yeah, Adzick went to the basket and he scored or whatever, something like that. So there was like 30 seconds left. And we're there. I think Gordon Weir's shooting foul shots, and I was there next to this guy. And the ball went up, and he just turned and slugged me right in the abdomen. Boom. So, because whatever. And you said something, not the most sportsmanlike conduct from something Palazzo, whatever. And then he said an unprecedented move. It's on my desk. So I told you, I read the poem about Montenegro, right? You're not going to F around with a Montenegrin, right? He's going to be out there protecting his son and the players, because that was a very rowdy crowd too. You could hear it in Gordon Weir's pirated tape. So then I left, and then there was just a few seconds left, and so we won. So,
well, certainly one of the great memories of that year, wasn't it?
That was did you go to the Kinlock game?
I did, yes.
You must have been you and my dad must have been the only Clayton. I mean, we were told, all right, we're not going to change in the locker room. We're going to leave immediately after the game. It's very, very, very rough, and they at the end they had full court pressure in there. They were tackling me. I know, and that's I think one of the reasons why I scored broke the scoring record, right? 42 points.
Right.
So in that sort of dingy gym, one of the rims was bent a little bit,
and also it had the overlapping half court, right? It wasn't long enough to have.
It wasn't and then so if you're doing full court pressure and have some big guys, I mean that makes it tight. So we managed to overcome that. And then on where you must have been on the bus.
I was.
So we got stoned. The bus got hit by, unfortunately, it wasn't by gunfire.
Right, with rocks thrown at the bus as we left.
Yeah, so
I was told that might happen, and I remember the principal, Mr. David, came along. I think because he was curious to see, and we were on the bus for a second, and somebody said like incoming.
And then get down.
Get down.
Got down, because if one of the windows shattered, we'd be in trouble. So, wow, those were the days, Stan.
Those were the days, Scott. Well, I want to thank you so much for spending the time sharing so generously with us, and for the great stories, and for all the great work that you've done. And I certainly have wonderful memories of our time together back in Clayton, and it's great to see what you've accomplished in your great career.
There's one more fabulous memory. You had a pirate radio station.
I did.
And we would meet in spring of senior year, and we'd have ping pong, or I guess table tennis. We'd have ping pong tournaments, and we had a bunch of good ping pong players. And there was the finals. I think it was between Tom Marcus, who's a really good ping pong player, and me. And it's best of 3. And it came down to the third game. And Tom hit this. He won 21-19 in game 3. And I recall he hit this side spin shot that somehow went off the corner of the side. It was unreturnable. I could have been Roger Federer, and there's been no way I would have returned this. And so he won fair and square. He was a really good big boy. But you had the whole thing. you had the whole thing hyped up and broadcast on your radio station.
I,
It was
I
it was hysterical. It was hysterical.
well, I thought it was a tribute to you as an athlete that obviously ping pong was not your main sport, but you were still the second best at ping pong.
I don't know. It's funny as well. I recall when John Buell was the tennis coach, and he was also the gym teacher. He'd rotate to the various grade schools when we do calisthenics and whatever. And so when I was in high school, he approached my father. He said, I think that, I was then Nick, right?
Right.
I was, and you know why I was Nick, right? Yes,
What?
no.
Because of your dad?
Well, yeah. So let me talk about
Okay.
this first. So he says, I think your son can be a really, really good tennis player, and I'll be glad to work with him during the summer. And my dad's response apparently was, no, goddamn country club sport. I guess that cut that off right there. My tennis career never began and it was cut short. So what occurred was when I was little, I was at home, I was always Scott, and my dad, was of course Nick. And then when I went to like kindergarten, I could be Nick because it's my first name, and I wanted to be just like my dad, right? So then I was Nick, but always Scott at home. So in basketball games in high school, when Pikey would yell, Nick, Nick, and if there was a crowd, sometimes I wouldn't hear. But if somebody said Scott, it's like my mother yelling at me, Scott, I would hear. So when those college coaches came around, he knew the family and he would call me Scott. So then when I went away to college, I said, okay, it's time to be Scott. So then the issue is what you do with the first name. So then I became in medically N period Scott Adzick MD, and like it's some stuffy name, but whatever. It was so that's how I ended up again as Scott.
Scott, yeah, because we all knew you as Nick, so
Yeah,
it's an
right.
adjustment to call you Scott. We always called you Nick.
That's funny. Okay, well, who are you going to interview from the Clayton High School classes 71 next?
Oh, I don't. It depends on the sequence of who accepts next. But I'm going through a large list of friends and family. As I say, you're the seventh one. You're the second one from the
Wow.
class. Gingy
Okay.
was the first, and I'm sure the names that you've mentioned already will be on my list. So
And
whichever one.
she's so smart and so well spoken. God, she's great.
So that was a great interview with Gingy. But I'm sure that I'll be talking to Tom and Nick
Okay.
Robbins and Arnold Kling and Tim
Nick
Poor and Jerry
Robbins.
Sacker and Peter Krentz. So
I,
we'll get to them all.
I recall one of my many injuries was due to Nick Robbins. In seventh grade, we had Mr. Theodore as the gym teacher. We're playing basketball, and I went for a baseline drive and went up. And Nick, who was on the other team, he went down like this, and I flipped over him and landed on my forearm. I had a green stick fracture where it goes like that, and he felt pretty badly about it. I was in the cast for like 4 months.
Oh no.
Whatever. But,
Well, you also mentioned that you went to Merrimack School. Would you go for a year or two to Merrimack?
just so that was my first year in
Yeah.
Clayton. Miss Peterson, Gingy Sharp was in that class, and so I was there at Merrimack for a year. I think there were two fifth grade classes.
Okay.
And then in sixth grade, because we moved into Clayton, we were in the Maryland district, so I went to
Yeah.
Maryland.
Okay. Because Barb went to Merrimack School, so I'm sure she recalls your 1 year there together.
Well, we'll have to dig up Miss Peterson's class, but I recall Marcy Hill and
Yep, that was Barb's good friend.
Gingy Sharf and yeah. So and Miss Peterson would always come in and say, "This is the most wonderful, brilliant class I have ever had." I'm sure she's said that every year for her entire 50-year career, but we like believed it. We're kind of going,
Sure.
oh yeah, oh yeah. All right, Stan, I'll
Well,
let you go. I've talked your ear off. I've gone way beyond my
that's
time
all
limit.
right. That's all right. You've set a new record for length of podcast, which will be something someone else will try to break. But thanks again for sharing everything that you shared with today. It's been great talking to you.
All right, Stan. Thank
Bye.
you. See you later.